For me, I would say it's an obligation to remember my friends who passed.
When I got back from Afghanistan, Remembrance Day was really hard for me.
I always think back to the guys that I went to school with that aren't with us anymore.
My squadron lost 83 bombers. 8 or 9 boys in every plane.
To keep their memories ready, to keep their memories alive, to keep their memories with us, we have to remember them.
Knowing the sacrifices that some of my soldiers have made, the ultimate sacrifice in some cases. Remembrance Day it brings it all together for us.
Remembrance Day for me is probably the most important day of the year.
Many things.
Everything.
When I went to Afghanistan, going out the gate the first time, I was like, this is it.
Our death toll for the police was around 70 to 100 police officers a month.
They're gone. And I'm here. One of the lucky ones.
I rushed in to pick him up, and I stepped on a landmine and I went up.
These 5 Afghan women had walked by. They unveiled their faces and they walked by and they waved. Them doing that really showed us that we were doing our job and that they didn't have any fear of the Taliban.
Whenever I see young people, I educate them, show them what is the importance of being in services.
In Remembrance Day, we pay tribute to those who stepped up and did what needed to be done.
I think the young folks of today have got to realize that it's not about warmongering, it's not about, anything like that. It's the fact that, there are so many people in the world that are helpless, that need protection.
Give a little thanks, to celebrate them, and to feel for whatever hardships they've gone through, basically because they've done it for these young people so that they could live.
It has to be told on the emotional side so that they understand that there was a reason for it. The reason for it was is basically to protect our families and our country.
I'm really honored when the kids come out and want to shake my hand and say thank you for what you did.
Remembrance Day is about remembering those who signed up and essentially wrote a check to say, I'm giving you everything.
Welcome to the story part of Remembrance Day. This is one of my favorite days of the school year. Not because it's a happy day per se, but it is a very interesting day. There's so many incredible stories of heroism and of bravery against all odds in Canada's military history. The Boer War, World War I, II, Korea, as well as Iraq and Afghanistan most recently, as well as our many peacekeeping missions. We owe an incredible debt of gratitude to those who have served in our many aspects of our armed forces. I've enjoyed sharing stories of Canada's Black Battalion, the Canadian 2nd Construction Battalion, that served so diligently over by Switzerland in World War I. I've had the privilege of learning and sharing the story of the Chinese Labor Corps, a very small, mostly unknown facet of brave individuals that came and served over in Europe in World War I, again in a service capacity. We've enjoyed really dynamic speakers, veterans of a more modern era. We got to enjoy Dan Jaworski coming to speak to us about his service in Afghanistan, husband of our own Mrs. Jaworski. And we're thankful for all their stories and their service. And today we have a guest speaker from our own school, from our student body, Nick Fletcher, telling the story of his great-grandpa and the Merchant Marines. The Merchant Marines are a part of Canada's lesser-known but no less impressive military history. In World War II, in particular, the British ruled the surface of the seas, and the German Navy ruled underwater with their U-boats, and both tried to starve each other into submission. Tremendous amounts of shipping were sunk, and many lost their lives. In response to this, convoys were set up, and the sailors that were responsible for keeping the lifeline of Britain during those dark times open, those were our merchant marines. The Canadian government estimated that there were probably about 12,000 people that served that would be entitled to benefits when they finally got around to doing it in 1999. And when they finally offered those benefits, they discovered 18,000 people were eligible. They even had no idea in their own country the incredible number and the depth of service. Do you know that it was the most dangerous part of the military to be a part of? 1 in 7 merchant marines gave their lives to make sure that people in Britain got fed. Today we experience relatively minor inconveniences of supply chain. Who can forget the lack of toilet paper adventures early in COVID? And then just general prices rising because it's a struggle to get computer chips or perhaps fruit or vegetables or meat. Well, this was a very, very real problem in Britain at the time. They weren't sure if they could get food at times. My own mother-in-law was a young child and couldn't eat wheat. She was celiac as a young kid and had to exist on bananas as her source of carbohydrates for the most part. And they don't grow in England. And so there were times where they were very afraid that she would become chronically malnourished. She also doesn't like bananas to this day. That's a lot of bananas to eat as a kid. My own grandpa went overseas at the time, and he was initially part of the medical corps. They sailed down to Florida and went across on a well-lit ship that wouldn't be torpedoed because it had Red Cross emblems on the side. And while he was in Florida, he helped a chef, and the chef gave him a bag of oranges. He walked ashore in England, and in his russack was a bag of oranges. He was probably the only person in England with an orange that day. And so the individuals who served in those merchant marines were very brave, as were the individuals who served in the U-boats. You see, we really didn't get along very well at that time. And so I've got little bits of history that I'd like to share with you. That is a cap badge from a U-boat sailor from the Kriegsmarine. So they were German. And this is actually a reproduction. Most of these that were real ended up on the ocean bottom. Even Dönitz's, the Vice Admiral's son from Germany, his own son died in a U-boat. Very few of them survived. Also, we mentioned the merchant marines. It didn't go so well for them. 1 in 7 passed away. We haven't done a great job of recognizing a lot of different groups of veterans, and the merchant marines were no different. Nick is going to be referring to a medal called the Canadian Volunteer Service Medal. It's this one right here. And on it we see that there are 7 individuals marching, a male and a female from the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, and then a woman with a nurse's habit on. But conspicuously absent from that are merchant marines. Merchant marines weren't even allowed to wear that medal for several years after the war, and it took time to recognize them for others. I'm looking forward to Nick sharing some of that story and my own research later. And so here's a story about an incredibly brave sailor who left the shores of Canada to defend freedom. This is his story of bravery. Take it away, Nick.
Hey everyone, today I'll be sharing my story about my great-grandpa and his life in World War II. So his name was Jeffrey Fletcher, and he was 19 years old, and he served in the Merchant Navy. So he went down to Halifax Harbor and got on a boat and sailed over to Great Britain, England. And just to explain what Merchant Navy was, basically they would be decoys. They got on these things called Q ships, and they would get tons of sand and all of this to make it look like a real battleship. And they made it look like a real battleship. They put different stuff on, like tanks, for example, and they make it look as realistic as possible as a real battleship, and that's what Navy was. So his job on the Q ship, or in the Merchant Navy, was to be a part of the galley. So what the galley was, it was basically the chef. He loved to make food, and he was serving in that. And so one day he was taking the trash can and went over to the side of the boat. He was going to go dump it, and he saw a torpedo coming towards him. So I could not imagine what that fear would look like and feel like, or what do you look like in that certain time. But he was able to run from one side of the boat to the other side of the boat and jump off and survive. So he did that, and and then he went on a second boat, and then the same thing, exact same thing happened again. He was dumping trash over the thing, and then he saw it, ran, yelled it was coming, and jumped off, and then he survived again. So these two torpedo things, they happened in an 8-day span from each other, and on the first one there was 9 survivors, and 11 of and on the second one there was 11 survivors. So the odds of that are very low that he would survive, because there was a lot of people on these ships. They weren't small at all. They, again, try to look like as real life battleships as possible, and try to look like a decoy. So then, so he got into the Atlantic Ocean at the time, or whatever ocean he was at, and he had to, I don't know how he got back to land or England or anywhere he was, but he was able to get back and got on a ship. And that happened twice. And I'm very sure there was a lot of loose ends to this story, because he was never able to share his whole story, because I can imagine it's very hard to talk about seeing all your friends die and see what type of torture they went through. It would be very hard to share that. So there's a lot of loose ends to the story, but I got the main gist of that. So he got on another one, and this one did not sink. He just did his job and all that. And then after the war was over, he came back to Canada, and he was a part of the dock police. And for me, if I ever had this type of situation he was in, and being on a ship and almost dying twice, I would never want to work close to ships. But he did. He loved being on ships, and he just loved ships in general, so he went to become the dock police. His second job was to be a chef. And again, if I had that type of experience of being a chef and dumping trash over the side and seeing torpedoes coming towards me, I don't think I would ever want to have that type of job, just to remember all that stuff coming back to him. So and then my great grandpa, when he was getting close to dying, he went to the newspaper and he wanted to talk about how the Merchant Navy people never got recognized for their service. So he was able to write or talk to a reporter, and he was able to get an article talking about his life on sea and how he thinks it's unfair that the Merchant Navy people, for all their sacrifice and all that they did, never got any recognition. So he did that. It was published in 2001. That article is very sacred to my dad. He also got lots of medals that he loved, and he would always, on Remembrance Day, he would walk in Georgetown, he would walk from a certain spot and then all the way to this Remembrance Day park thing. And then he would do that for as long as my dad could remember. And he did that for many years. Even when he got very old, he was keep on doing that. And so I was never able to meet my great grandpa, but I can just imagine how great he is from the stories I've heard about him. And I wish he was able to tell the whole story about this to my dad, so that we would know what really happened and know the whole story about what happened to my great grandpa, what happened to Jeffrey Fletcher.
Thank you so very much, Nick, for sharing the story of your great-grandpa. The Merchant Marines are an incredible group of individuals who have served greatly and who have been mistreated, neglected more than any group, or almost any group, perhaps in Canadian World War II history. I love how he talked about loose ends. I too had service members who struggled to tell the story of the incredible hardships that they experienced. They didn't want to talk about the loss of people that they entrusted their life to. It must have been incredibly difficult. Loose ends, on the other hand, offer opportunity for research, and although the stories don't always line up perfectly, I really enjoyed trying to patch together history from story. So Nick told us about Q-boats. Those were ships that were designed to look like they were innocent little ships, but were really ships of war that contained the implements of battle on them. And so the goal, of course, was to get them to surface, to save their precious torpedoes, and to use their deck gun to bully them off the boat and to sink it. But at the last second, reveal that they actually had big deck guns and to fire on those subs. It turned out to be a pretty dismal failure of effort. It turns out their mines and nets and airplanes ultimately were a much better deterrent. Nonetheless, it didn't take away from the bravery of these individuals. And when I did research on Q ships, there were only 2 Q ships that were actually sunk of the dozen or so that were commissioned in such close proximity. Those ships were the HMS Prunella and the HMS Edgehill. To give you some sense, on the way there, the HMS Prunella was sunk over 200 kilometers away from the nearest friendly shore. 200 kilometers. It'd be easier to go across Lake Ontario than to get to shore there. And while they were finally rescued a few days later, as soon as he got ashore, no sense of, I'm sorry about your post-traumatic stress disorder. It was, get back on the boat, we've got a war to fight. And so on the way away, and at over 400 kilometers away, the Edgehill gets torpedoed. And it was a stubborn ship. It took 3 torpedoes to finally sink her. But nonetheless, many, many people were lost. Those explosions were huge. And to end up in the ocean again, just 9 days later, if these are the 2 ships that coincide with our service member Fletcher, that is a tremendous story of bravery, of loss, and overcoming all obstacles. If we lost a soldier, they were given, or their families were given, a Silver Cross. Now this is one from World War I. They differ very little, except for the little emblem in the center. But this wasn't even awarded to the families of merchantmen who were lost at sea until much later. If you go to a cenotaph, and I hope you do once things are back to normal, a special wreath is laid every year called the Silver Cross Mother's Wreath. And of all the Silver Cross recipients, their families, one of the mums, and we even have one Silver Cross husband today, they will lay a wreath on behalf of all the individuals who will not be celebrating with a loved one because of conflict. In addition to mystery there, taking a look at those medals that his great-grandpa won, there's a tremendous mystery there because he has an Italian star, which means that not only did he serve in the Atlantic, but he must have made the Mediterranean at one point. But not only that, further along the medal set, we get to see that there is a Pacific star. They're actually a little bit more rare, which means that he served down through the Indian Ocean and into the Pacific after VE Day, after the war was over in Europe. He must have served over in the Pacific, supporting that campaign against World War II Japan. So there's a lot of mysteries. One of the mysteries that isn't there, though, is the fact that these merchant marines were treated very poorly. When they came back from the war, while other soldiers, other service members were given opportunities for much cheaper or subsidized education, were given opportunities for land grants and loans for starting up businesses, the merchant marines were told, stay on your ships, we need you because we need to sell these ships that we've made. In the end, they were sold at a pittance, and those merchant marines had to fight for decades for recognition, putting them forever behind. Estimates are at least $30,000 that they were owed in today's dollars, but that loss never can be fully repaid. In the end, people like Jeffrey Fletcher fought for recognition for our merchant marines, and ultimately Bill C-61 was finally passed in 1999, giving them full recognition as veterans. And so thank you to all of those who gave of themselves, who were brave to serve in the cause of freedom. And those who bravely served, even though they were on the other side. Many of them were young and did not have a choice as to the armies that they served for. So, lest we forget, thank you, Jeffrey Fletcher, for your service in the Merchant Marines, and a special memory to all those that you lost in those ships. Thank you.
In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly. Scarce heard amid the guns below, we are the dead, short days ago. We lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe, to you from failing hands we throw. The torch be yours to hold it high, if ye break faith with us who die. We shall not sleep though poppies grow in Flanders fields.